Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles and cousins, of course, and mops and pops, or if you prefer, nanas and papas, and baseball fans everywhere. Tonight, it's another night of the Valley Baseball League podcast. You know, we just spent 6 parts bringing you the hardcore stats, the all-decade team, the batting averages, the number of bats, the whips, the ERAs. Last Sunday, we were fortunate enough to dive into kind of the emotional side of baseball. Tonight, we're going to try the more mystical, spiritual. You decide what the right word is, but we're going to ask the question, what is it about baseball? Let me set the stage and tell you what I think it is, and then I'm going to turn it over to our 2 resident experts. I just dubbed them experts, so if they look a little shell-shocked when you see them in a few seconds, that'll be why. It's all my fault. But so here's what I think about baseball. Remember, I grew up playing hockey. It's a stick and puck sport as opposed to stick and ball sport. You chase the puck around, you make plays, you pass it, you put the puck in the net, and you get rewarded for it. To me, baseball is really the perfect sport in the sense that as a hockey player, I have to be fit. I have to have a quick recovery speed. I have to have strength. I have to have good eye-hand coordination. But, you know, I don't have to sit in the outfield for 3 hours and concentrate on a play that may never come my way. Well, I have to have good eye-hand coordination, and there is some strategy to it. You know, it's more kind of off the cuff. I'm not rewarded for stealing things in hockey like I am in baseball. And there's so many other things about baseball that I think it's a perfect game. You have to be fit. You have to be fast. You have to be smart. You have to have strategy. You can steal and be deceptive. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And in my mind, what baseball does is it kind of takes all of the skills. You got to be good at math or you're never going to know your batting average. And all those things, and it puts it into one thing. It's not just about being fast or strong or quick or whatever. But that's my take. You don't pay me for my take. So why don't I turn it over to my area residents? Let me introduce you to Austin Gisriel. If you haven't taken a look at his podcast on, right here, Safe at Home, I highly recommend you go back a few episodes and check it out. He's the author of 6 books and a number of papers. It's all in that podcast. Plus, I put links in there. Anyway, Austin brought up a point about it, and I'll let him bring that up in a second. But basically, the essence of it was you don't see football players walking out of the corn to meet on the gridiron. You see baseball players. Our other expert, Marcia Norgowski. Did I say that right, Marcia? Nagorski. Sorry.
That's
I don't have
okay.
it in front of me, Nagorski. Marcia wrote such a heartfelt piece. I got to be honest, it just completely touched me. So you've heard kind of my take. I personally think baseball is the perfect sport. But let's start, ladies first. Marcia, what is it about baseball that's so captivating? Or what captivates you? I know you grew up playing it. And by the way, if you haven't seen Marcia's podcast, go back a couple of episodes. She wrote this heartfelt piece about missing scoring and kind of, the whole pattern of life and going to games, even though it's cold and unhappy. And she's got this wonderful, I wish I'd asked her to do this before, got this wonderful bag that she keeps all her scorecards in and the great history of the game. Anyway, Marcia, what are your thoughts on what is it about baseball?
To me, it's a couple of things. First of all, it's very personal to me. It connects me to my dad, who's gone, and to lots of members of my family. I grew up in New York, and there were Mets fans and Yankees fans in my family, and virtually every holiday growing up was ribbing each other because they're never good at the same time. So somebody's always mocking the other one for, in the 70s, it was the Mets who were better, and then for a while in the 80s, the Yankees took over, and, it was a family thing for us. And so there's that. And now, of course, that I have my 2 boys, it connects me to my sons who are both big baseball fans. And it was something that my husband and I bonded over when we first met. I joke with him all the time that he doesn't know how lucky he is. He has a wife who's willing to go on a baseball honeymoon and, asks for score books for her birthday and things like that. So it's very personal. but it's also, one of the things I love about it is that you never know what's going to happen in a baseball game. Um, I feel like most other sports are relatively predictable, but I feel like at least 2 or 3 times a season I see something in a baseball game I've never seen before. And sometimes it's something tremendously exciting, like an unassisted triple play, or a player who goes 6 for 6, or a team that homers 4 times in the same inning, or bats around, or whatever it might be. Sometimes it's a spectacular turn double play or a play at the plate. Sometimes it's a weird rundown combination that you have to spend 5 minutes reconstructing to write in your scorebook, or a fog that comes into Comiskey Park so that they have to call the game for 45 minutes because nobody can see, or a black cat that comes on the field that they have to catch. It's Every game is unique. Every ballpark is unique. That's maybe one of my favorite things about baseball, that the dimensions of the infield are the same, but the dimensions of the outfield are unique to every park. Um, it's why you don't hear about people, just the same way as Austin said, you don't come out of the corn for a gridiron toss. You don't hear about people going to visit all of the football professional stadiums in the country, or all of the hockey arenas. You hear about people road tripping to see baseball parks because they're special and they're different, and they each have their unique charms. So to me, it's all about the joy of discovery each time and the connection to generations.
Wow, really well said. All right, Austin. What about you? What is it? What is so? You know what? Do me a favor, Austin. You have a piece. Tell everybody about that piece we were talking about the other day. Uh, the baseball fathers, sons, and
Oh, certainly. I was going to say I'm going to start this with a shameless plug, which is I've actually answered the question that you're asking in this little volume, Father, Sons, and Holy Ghost, Baseball is a Spiritual Experience. And it's so interesting to hear Marcia speak, because what she has said, I've touched on almost every point that she made, like the weird rundown play, for example. And I have an example of a double play sacrifice fly at a game I witnessed down in Greensboro, North Carolina. And if you're a real baseball fan, you just sit there and marvel at that, or when Nick Markakis was playing for the Orioles. I was watching this game on TV, and there was a rundown play, and there he was at second base as a right fielder. And if you're a baseball fan, again, you're going, man, that's perfection. That's just what the right fielder is supposed to do on this particular play. And I've broken this down into 7 chapters, and this might sound somewhat familiar. The first chapter's in the beginning. You got to believe, redemption, where 2 or more are gathered, relics, Holy Ghosts, and miracles. And so in quite a serious vein, I really think that baseball touches that spiritual archetype that we have. It includes heroes. It includes faith. And to a point Marcia was making, if your football team is down by 3 touchdowns with 1.5 minutes to go, you're going to lose. That's just, there's no way around it. You're going to lose. If your hockey team's down 6-1 with 2 minutes to go, maybe, or with 1 minute to go, you're going to lose. Whereas in baseball, even if you're down by 20 runs and you got 3 outs to go, it's still possible. And I think in baseball that faith is rewarded just often enough, that your team does come back in the bottom of the 9th to win the game, that it keeps us going. And faith is one of those things that it needs to be exercised. And baseball is a means through which we can exercise that faith, to keep rooting for the home team, to keep saying, wait till next year, which I think really touches people in ways that they're not even consciously aware.
Yeah, well, just a quick disclaimer. I have not read Father, Sons, and Holy Ghost. It's a concept that Austin mentioned when we spoke last week. So look, nothing up my sleeve, but I think it's interesting that you bring that up, and I can't wait to hear what the other 6 chapters are. Before we go on, Marcia, any reaction to in the beginning from what Austin had said?
Yeah, I'm excited to read it myself. A couple of things. So first of all, um, I have the joy of being both a Mets fan and a Cubs fan, and I live 4 blocks from Wrigley Field, as I mentioned previously. And wait till next year as a Cubs fan is an amazing thing, but having next year finally happen is about as close to a spiritual practice in baseball as you're going to get. I have my 2016 World Series cup here. Sharing with my family with the windows open so we could hear the crowd gathered around Wrigley, to go over to Wrigley Field at 11:30 at night with my sons, held by the hand so I didn't lose them in the crowd, and share with 500,000 maniacally happy Cubs fans the joy of next year being this year was really one of the great experiences of my life. The other thing I'll say is that I love the title of your book, but one of the things, I'm a nice Jewish girl from Long Island, and I'm a very practicing, observant Jewish person. And the joke in sports is that the shortest book ever written is Jewish Sports Heroes. But the fact is that there are many, many former current and former Jewish baseball players. And, we all know the story about Sandy Koufax, who wouldn't play on Yom Kippur. And there are a lot of Jews who love baseball. You don't find a lot of Jewish football players or hockey players. Got to save our hands for being a surgeon someday, right? But there are tons of historical Jewish baseball players, some of whom are quite fabulous. Everybody from Sandy Koufax to Hank Greenberg to Mo Berg to Sean Green. And there's a tremendous amount of pride that I personally take in that. And there's a kosher barbecue place in my neighborhood that has Jewish baseball memorabilia all over the walls. The guy who owns it, Jeff Ader, is a big collector. And so it is literally a spiritual practice for me as part of my actual faith.
All right, before we go much further, I got to dial into the Mets and Cubs thing. Mm-hmm. So I was talking about that with my wife tonight in the car, and the one thing she said, she's like, okay, so come on. If you're at the Mets versus the Cubs game, who are you rooting for in that case? And the answer is?
So the Cubs get plenty of support in my household from the other 3 members. So the Mets are my first love, and I will root for the Mets over the Cubs as if they're playing each other. I attended a 2015 playoff game at Citi Field between the Mets and the Cubs and rooted for the Mets, and my husband didn't want to sit with me. But if the game matters significantly more to the Cubs than to the Mets, if the Mets are out of it and it's an important game for the Cubs, I'll root for the Cubs. I don't have a problem with that. I used to say it was no problem being a fan of both because they were never good at the same time. And then 2015 happened, and I was watching one game on the television and one game on the iPad during the NLDS, and it nearly killed me. It was exhausting and stressful. And then when they were both in the NLCS, that was really hard.
Marcia, that's so interesting that you not to interrupt you, Graham, but just quickly, because Graham and I have a connection, of course, to the Valley League, the Summer Wooden Bat League here in the Shenandoah Valley. And one of the things that I wrote about in the book was this family that lives in Newmarket, Virginia. She is the meals coordinator for the Newmarket Rebels, and they're originally from Chicago. And when the Cubs won the World Series, they gathered in their living room, their kids and the 2 of them, and then they filmed themselves watching the last out, and they posted this, and it was moving. I mean, it moved. They were crying. It moved me to tears, and so I contacted them, and of course I know them pretty well. I said, listen, if it's all right with you, I got to write about this. This is exactly what I'm talking about. That this has deep spiritual overtones, that you've invested in this team. You've had your faith in this team, and now that faith has been rewarded. So there's a whole scene of the Kipps family from Newmarket, Virginia, part of a chapter, and their experience in the joy that they had in watching the Cubs win that World Series. So
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that. Yeah. It was something else. I mean, we had a huge debate in the house about, as you know, the radio broadcast and the TV broadcast are not synced up. And then on top of that, we've got the sound outside the window. So there was a big discussion whether we were going to watch it solely on TV, whether we were going to listen to Pat Hughes on the radio at the same time. And mostly we can't handle the delay. But when it came time for the final out and we knew we were getting to it, we muted the television and turned on Pat Hughes because he is the voice of Chicago baseball to everybody in my family. One of the best broadcasters who ever lived. And to hear him call the final out, I burst into tears. And I lived through the 86 World Series with the Mets and the 88 playoffs and the 2000 playoffs. And I've never cried over a baseball game like I like a baby cried over that one. And then we put on our shoes and went out into the night with everyone. I've never experienced anything like it in baseball.
Yeah, so you had your communal moment there when you went out with everybody else.
Yeah.
Well, hey, go ahead. I think you were going to say it was special.
It was special. It really was. And and it wasn't just that. It was, the parade 2 days later, and there's a firehouse right across the street from Wrigley Field, and the firefighters, climbing up on the roof and celebrating with the whole neighborhood. It was amazing.
Wow. Well, so no question about that. I'm not a fan per se, but I was certainly thrilled to see them, finally pull it off. There was something magic. Part of me makes me wonder if, part of the allure, for lack of a better word, is that baseball also kind of frames history. I was reading about, one of the issues around World War II was the idea of getting baseball going because they wanted the distraction, wanted to give people a break from the traumas of war. Which makes me wonder, Austin, what's chapter 2? Is chapter 2 the Exodus?
Actually, chapter 2 is You Gotta Believe. Okay. And so really the chapters are kind of organized around these religious themes that, in the beginning, it's not just that baseball has a creation mythology, but we all have, as Marcia was saying, how we got started, what hooked us for the most part as children. The whole You Gotta Believe chapter is the idea that, you do exercise a certain degree of faith. And there's, as I said, you never know. That's really the beauty of baseball. Until that 27th out is recorded, there's nothing about that game that's certain. And the infinite combination, and a buddy of mine, my baseball buddy, he was a math major and he was an analyst for the Department of Defense. And I said, Al, can you tell me, what are the chances that any baseball game has ever had the exact same sequence? And he said, no way. It's just nil. They'll never, ever have the same sequence. So just as Marcia was saying, I think you used the word unique. You're seeing something different every time you go out there. And, of course, if you know what you're looking at, and that's something I tell people, say, oh, baseball's slow, this and that. I tell them, it's because you don't know what you're looking at. Sit with me for a game, that even at 10-0 and every count's 3-2 and, but Graham will know my reference here. I knew a gentleman who coached through 7 different presidencies from 1946 through 2010. And we would sit at a game like that and he'd say, the center fielder's just not getting a jump on the ball. He's just standing still out there. He's, so there was always something to look at. And the redemption stories, I think, is another very important part of baseball. And of course, that's most famously played out, I guess you could say, in Field of Dreams or Shoeless Joe, which was the novel on which the movie was based. But there are redemption stories all over the game. And interestingly enough, if you think about it, Mighty Casey struck out. We remember the guy who failed. We've canonized almost the guy who failed because baseball, like life, is it's such a game of failure. And if you can't handle the failure, you're not going to be very successful. And I do think, and I say this in all seriousness, that's a great metaphor for life because it ain't going to be rosy. And there are going to be all kinds of times you're really going to struggle. But there's something glorious in the struggle. And you have that faith that, one of these days, Casey's going to, knock in those 2 runners. Flynn and Cooney, I believe.
Yeah.
Well, before we go to redemption, I want to talk a little bit about baseball being too slow. because there's a lot of effort on the part of Major League Baseball and in our Valley Baseball League as well, to move the game along. Everybody's got the 2-minute breaks between the last out of the top of the inning and the first pitch of the second inning. Major League Baseball is trying to move it. They talk about making it a 7-inning game, doing all kinds of stuff. But let me throw something out at you. Personally, I think that, baseball being what it is, and us getting away from it has really kind of affected our ability to concentrate and pay attention. There's power in concentration. I was recently at a PR presentation, and the people came out and said, congratulations, goldfish now have a longer attention span than we do. They're about 8.5 seconds. And you know what? I don't want to be a species where I'm known for an attention span that's shorter than a goldfish. I mean, the deal with baseball is, you got to go out there and pay attention for the whole game. And that might be 3 hours, that might be 4 hours, but you drop your attention for 1 minute or a few seconds and the ball comes at you. I mean, that's what everyone's going to remember. So personally, I think there's an advantage to having people play baseball and getting the kids involved in baseball, because it teaches them concentration. And I think that's a vital part of who we are and what we do. Any thoughts on the game being slow, Marcia?
Oh, sure. I used to have a hat that said baseball isn't boring, you are. And that's kind of how I feel about it. And I've always said, I find a lot of other sports, particularly football, to be kind of dull, but that's because I don't understand them. I don't think that other people think they're dull if they understand the game. If I understood football the way I understood baseball, I would never be bored by it. And I'm always learning something new. But I think there are certain things built into the fabric of the game that make it a slow pastime. I think the fact that, as Austin so rightly pointed out, it's the only major sport that doesn't have a clock. You have innings, not time, and that means that you never know when the game is going to end. To me, that's a good thing, but to a lot of other people, the fact that they can't just say, okay, we've got 5 minutes left in play and then we can go home or go get dinner, that's something they don't enjoy. I think the fact that it's the only major sport where the defense is the one in the control of the ball, not the offense, really affects play. People always say, oh, it's not the time, it's nothing happens. Lots of things are happening. It's just that they're defensive things more than offensive things. In most other sports, you're watching the play between the defense and offense, you're watching a lot of offense. It makes them seem much more interesting and active in a way that if you know baseball, they're not. What you're looking for in baseball, though, is the minutia. Did the manager put on the shift? Did the first baseman move over? Is the second baseman preparing for a double play or not? Where is the right fielder standing? All of that to me is fascinating, but to somebody who doesn't know the game, it looks like they're watching the dandelions grow and nothing's going on. I don't like most of the proposals to shorten the game. If you want to shorten the game, you need to shorten the commercial breaks, frankly, not what's actually happening during the game and on the field. That's one of the things that makes it feel so long when you're there. The breaks between innings are much longer than they need to be for baseball purposes because they're standing around waiting for the ads to play. I understand why they have to do that, but that's what's making the games longer. As far as what's actually happening in the game, I don't want to start the 10th inning with somebody standing on second. I'm a purist. I want the game as it's meant to be played. I want you to have to throw your intentional walk pitches. I don't want you to put up 4 fingers and show it to the manager, because one time in 1,000, one of those pitches is going to go sailing over the catcher's head and players are going to move around. You have to have, if you want to give an intentional walk, there's got to be risk. You got to throw 4 more pitches and get that on your pitch count. There's strategy to it that you're changing every time you do this, and you're changing the game in a way that I don't like. That said, if baseball really is in decline and it's going to save my sport, sure, think about it. I don't think there's a problem.
All right, well said. How about you, Austin? Where do you stand on baseball is too slow?
It's certainly slowed down. One of the things that fascinates me is if you go back and look at games from 40 or 50 years ago, and here in the Mid-Atlantic we have the Massa Network, and every now and then they'll show one of the Orioles World Series games from 1970. And those games, there's one they show Game 3 that was 9-3. And that game's over in like 2 hours and 15 minutes, even though 12 runs are scored. And I think it's a different part of it's the different hitting philosophy. Those guys would go up there and they did not want to strike out. that was an embarrassment almost. And so you swung at the first good pitch that you saw, and you also knew that that guy standing on the mound might not throw even 90 miles an hour, but for the most part, most major league pitchers could put the ball where they wanted and hit the strike zone. And now we've got this, you got to work the count, and the pitchers are trying to make the perfect pitch because the strike zone's also shrunk. You can also see that most definitely when you watch these old games from 40 or 50 years ago. But I agree with Marcia about the intentional walk. I don't want to see a man standing on second base. And I think part of the beauty for people who really understand it is it's this ebb and flow of drama and the dramatic moments. You don't know when they're coming. It could be the first pitch is the most important pitch of the entire ball game. But as the pitch comes in and the batter makes ready to hit it, and that play unfolds based on, that pitch being delivered, and then there's time in between, and there's time to eat that hot dog, and time to talk to your neighbor, and time to teach your kids, well, now that guy just popped out, so here's how we're going to score that. All those wonderful things, or to make it most local, if you're at Rebel Park, to watch the full moon come up over Massanutten Mountain in the 7th or 8th inning. Those things are, to me, all part of the fabric of the game that's apart from, but important to include with, what actually goes on in the field.
That's part of why I think it's the perfect game, is because it seems like it encapsulates the whole gestalt. It's part of it's part of failure. It's part of taking risks. It's part of every element. It's also part of the strategy of, are you trying to throw off the pitcher's rhythm? So let's do this. Let's talk a little bit about redemption, and partly about what you had brought up, Austin, which is it's a game of failures. To me, if I think of a game that I want to put my son in, that's going to give him a great set of skills, baseball's it, because part of life is being able, part of failures is taking the risk, because if you don't take the risk, you're not going to, have the opportunity to hit the ball. So it's like, I'm going to swing at this pitch, and even though I miss it, I've got to take the chance that I might hit it. We just talked to Mike Garza, who came out and played in the Valley Baseball League. He played in 2009 and 2010. Mike laid down numbers in 2009 and 2010 that haven't been beat by any other player in the league in 10 years. And when he came out, one of his stats was stealing bases. He stole 23 bases. And it was just an idea he had. It was like, I want to go see if I can do this. So he took the risk, and he was rewarded for it. Roberto Hernandez was in the league as a catcher, Valley Baseball League. He started pitching and made his transition into pitching in the VBL, and then went on to be one of only 11 guys to appear in 1,000 games. We'll just keep going, ladies first. Marcia, what do you think? What does redemption mean to you in reference to baseball?
Well, I think both you and Austin are absolutely right to talk about failure in baseball. My father used to say the hardest thing to do in professional sports is hit a baseball. And it is, can you imagine in any other sport, if you got your job right 3 times out of 10, you can have a job for 20 years. And if you get it right 4 times out of 10, you're in the Hall of Fame and one of the 2 or 3 best that ever played. Which means that every player in baseball is failing at their job at least 70% of the time. That's extraordinary. That's what we've chosen to love here, is something where most of the time the offense is going to fail at their job. And there's no such thing as an undefeated baseball season. There just isn't. One of my colleagues, Paul Wu, used to have a sign outside his office that said, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, sometimes it rains. And the other thing is that my father used to point out that, there are 162 games in a baseball season, right? Every team's going to win 54 games. Every team's going to lose 54 games. And it's what you do with the other 54 games that matters, right? Now, there are, of course, teams that haven't lost 54 games, but I think you can count them on one hand. So generally speaking, we accept that you're going to lose a third of your games in baseball. There's no other sport that's like that. It's part of what makes baseball wonderful, is that it's human. All of us can play it as kids, And all of us can understand Mighty Casey striking out. All of us have done it. It's nobody in baseball is perfect. Nobody's even close. And it's what allows us to feel connected to what goes on the field. Because even the very best, even Ted Williams, got it wrong 60% of the time.
Wow. Yeah, well said. Maybe that's part of the allure. I like what you said. You don't have to be perfect to play the game. Maybe that's part of it. Austin, what about you? Any thoughts on failure, redemption, and
Yeah, I'll give you a story that ties this topic to the idea of whether a game's too long or not. And it's something I wrote about in the chapter on redemption. My older daughter, and I think she was in 8th grade at this time, we drove down, and we were living in Maryland at the time. We drove down to Luray to see a playoff game between the Wranglers and the Rebel. This was July the 31st. And the game gets tied up. It was a great game. Daniel Murphy, by the way, formerly of the Nationals, was playing for Luray. The game gets tied up. We're into the 12th inning, 13th inning, 14th inning. Now we're making jokes in the stands. This game's a month old because now it's past midnight. It's now August. When we started this game, it was July. So one of the Luray players steps up to the plate. This is the bottom of the 17th inning, and he hits a fly ball to right field. And the right fielder turns around, and those of us on the Rebel side, and nobody had left, of course, who'd come over the mountain to see the game. Right fielder turns around to play the carom, and there was no carom. The ball just carries out into the night. We lost. So my daughter, who's in 8th grade, this is about 2 o'clock in the morning now, by the way. She cries the entire way back over the mountain, almost the whole way home on 81. Well, when I was writing this book, this was 2017, so a decade or so later after this playoff game. And I was gathering information because the book's something of a memoir. I said, Becky, what was your favorite game? She said, that game in Luray, even though we lost.
wow.
And I thought, well, what a great answer, because it meant so much to her. We were all together on this. People that we didn't know when the game started, but by the time the game was over, we knew who they were. And the bond that she and I shared, I don't want to say bitterness in losing, but just that, having to face losing, but we had each other in the face of that losing, and then to realize, hey, there'll be other games, other games that again, we're going to have a chance to win. So I just thought that was a really, really interesting answer on her part. And I think it certainly wasn't too long for us, as far as the game went itself. And the idea of redemption that, we lost tonight, but tonight's just tonight, and we have another night.
Right. Hey, we should probably wrap this up in the next few minutes. You guys have been so kind to join me this evening to discuss what it is about baseball. I know there's more to be said. As a way of wrapping it up, let me share with you what one of my favorite baseball things is. Remember, I spent decades hating the sport, but I have such fond memories being a kid. I used to have this big transistor radio, and it was so much fun after the sun went down because you could hear AM stations all over the country. And I remember tuning in and finding that there was just something about that sound of the play-by-play over the AM radio. Half the time I didn't know who the teams were, who the players were, but there was just something captivating about hearing that sound. That'll go down as one of my fondest memories. Marcia, I've had such a wonderful time talking to you. Any memories that stand out, or some essence of the game that you hold close and dear?
Well, so many things, but I think one of the things that's worth talking about is what it is to be a female baseball fan. Austin, I'm really glad that you mentioned your daughter. People talk about baseball as, fathers and sons playing catch, but being a female baseball fan is a special thing in its own way. It can be difficult. Men often think that because you're a woman, you can't possibly know anything about the game or care. They assume that you only like the game because your husband does or because your father does. I've had more men than I care to count in the stands at ball games, offer to teach me to keep score when it's obvious I'm sitting there with my own scorebook. It's, it's a bit of a problem. But one of the things I always tell people is, the song of baseball is Take Me Out to the Ball Game, but most people only know the chorus. They don't know the verses. And the verse of the song is about a woman named Katie Casey. Katie Casey was baseball mad, had the fever, and had it bad. And when she says, take me out to the ball game, what she's saying is, I don't want to go out to dinner with you, and I don't want to go to the show. If you want to take me out on a date, take me out to the ball game. It's about a woman. The most important piece of baseball lore there is about a female baseball fan. And to me, growing up as one of two daughters of a man who loved baseball, who decided he was going to teach me about it in the 1970s when people didn't teach their daughters about baseball that much, that means a lot to me. To know, if you've ever read the book Wait Till Next Year by Doris Kearns Goodwin, one of the great historians in the history of the world, she writes about her love for the Brooklyn Dodgers and how when the games were played during the day, she would come home from school and write down everything that happened in the game so that over dinner she could give her father a play-by-play so that he wouldn't miss it even though he couldn't listen to the game while he was at work. And apparently she didn't know that you could get the whole box score in the evening paper that night, and he never told her because he liked getting the play-by-play from his daughter. So to me, yes, I only have sons, but when I get to go to the baseball game with little girls and teach them how to keep score, it's really one of the most special things in the world to me about the game. And to talk to other female baseball fans and to show the men that, some of us do know what we're talking about. That's something that's really part of me as a person and part of the game for me.
Wow, well said. All right, Austin, final thought, wrap it up. Clearly now you know what you're teaching your daughter. That's the legacy you're leaving. What a nice gift.
Well, thank you. I certainly hope so. I haven't quite had the same impact on the younger one. She's a football fan, but that's okay. Everybody's got to follow their own sports path here. And I think, you asked Marcia about like a favorite memory or the most important thing about the game. And I've been to World Series games and seen playoff games and important games and major league games, and been to the College World Series and really experienced a lot of different kinds of baseball. But there really is something about just some small town, whether it's college summer league or minor league, on a warm summer night, and guys that most of them you're never going to hear from ever again, and they're out there again. You don't know what's going to happen that night. And you know that other people, especially in a small venue like that, nobody's there because of corporate sponsorship. They're out there, in Hagerstown or Frederick or these little minor league places, Salem, Lynchburg. They're out there because they love the game. And there's a certain camaraderie, whether you even, talk to anybody else or not. That guy way out there in the left field bleachers shares something with you. And I just think that's something very special. It's a very warm feeling to just walk in that ballpark and know that that's the experience that you're going to have.
Yeah, well said. Well, then to wrap it up, I think maybe the bow we can put on this one is something along the lines of something magic happens when it's for the love of the game. Austin, Gizriel, Marcia, my resident experts, love having you here. I've loved the opportunity to sit down and talk with you about what it is about baseball. I know you guys are counting. There's still 4 more chapters as I count, but we'll have to get to those next time. Can't thank you guys enough. Any thoughts, please share them. Love to hear your thoughts and comments. What is it about baseball that inspires you, that draws you back? VBL League at isomermedia.com. That's VBL League at isomermedia.com. On behalf of all the fans everywhere, all the mops and pops and nanas and papas and everybody else, thanks for watching. There's more to come tomorrow night, same time, same channel. Have a good night, everyone.